So once again, thank you everybody, and we really appreciate this opportunity and this privilege to present to you our point of view on data governance solutions. As Erica said, as Mabel said, just a quick introduction to myself. I'm based here in Singapore, right, as part of a regional data governance advisory team for Informatica. And what we do is support all our different customers across various industries and countries, as well as our internal technical teams across Asia Pacific. So hopefully we'll have an interesting discussion today, and I welcome any questions towards the end of this session. So without further ado, hopefully this is coming up, right? We have a simple and straightforward agenda for you, right? What we are really trying to look at is understand a little bit more about the situation and use cases around data governance journeys with an example of one that has done so quite successfully. And secondly, we want to dive in a little bit deeper into what an enterprise data governance platform looks like. How do we go about setting up something in an easy and fast-free manner? And of course, we mustn't forget emphasis on what are the kind of outcomes you can expect when we go through such a journey of increasing maturity. Right? So going into the first section, which is really about, what is the background to some of our customers and the use cases that they have, right? As a sort of context here, Informatica to date has over 500 data governance customers globally, and they span all sorts of industries, right? Finance, healthcare, manufacturing, supply chain, you name it, right? And indeed, we do have customers here in ASEAN as well, covering many of the similar industries that we talked about, right? Including some government bodies as well. But for the purpose of our discussion today, I would like to start our tour of data governance looking at a case study of this organization here called New York Life, right? They have successfully lived through the data governance journey for quite a few years now, which is why I've chosen to highlight their story. And as you can see on the screenshot there, indeed, we have recorded interviews with their data leaders about their story, their journey, as well as many other organizations that we have worked with for the purpose of data governance. But coming back to New York Life right here, this is essentially an organization that is over 100 years old, has thousands of customers, thousands of employees countrywide, as well as millions of customers under their policies. Essentially, being a financial institution, right? They were tasked to create a governance structure as well as a business case on how they were going to address long-standing pain points around data quality, automation, and other similar problems that they faced across a very wide and distributed data architecture. So just as a brief background, the data leaders in New York Life start, right, with certain priorities and principles, right? And chief among them is, number one, being able to align with the business needs that are currently existing, right? And this theme will come up again and again as we go through this presentation, as indeed, there is no success in this domain of data governance without addressing the actual value as well as buy-in from stakeholders. But likewise, this is a two-way street. So the structure also emphasized the principle of accountability, right? Even though the central governance team set up the approach, the journey, as well as the structure on how they would develop this platform, they sought at every step to find the accountability and the sponsorship, right? Top down from the C-level, of course, but more importantly, from various departments and data owners who they know would ultimately take charge of the different domains of data which we brought into the data governance journey. Now, fast forward, of course, when they went through and chose Informatica as a data governance solution, which we'll talk about later. Importantly, what were the sort of outcomes that they have experienced and achieved to date, right? So as you can see towards the bottom there, one of the key and very interesting outcomes that was shared with us after the fact was the idea of building up data not just as a capability in the company, but really as an experience for their users and line of business, right? And the idea was always to have a one-stop shop and a user-friendly way to find, understand data, as well as its quality. Along the way, of course, in the States, but similarly, we have seen in Europe, as well as in APAC, there are increasing privacy laws, which this initiative also focused in order to put them in a good position to achieve compliance. So this is just a high-level journey, and we will touch back to some of the details as we go along this use case. But I bring up New York Life really as an example to say that When we talk about data governance here, there is no one size fits all. Right? There are some major strategic drivers that we have seen as we work with many different customers, such as them, but also many other industries. So as you can see here on the screen, the first one, insights and analytics, in fact, is one that has taken the front position of front driver in our region here, as well as have been more frequently asked over the past year and a half. Right? Essentially, here we are helping heads of data, analytics leaders understand the various sources of information that they have, build better governance into their major data platforms, whether it be positioned across a data lake, a data warehouse, or some combination thereof. In that conversation, of course, we also support regulatory compliance, right? So I spoke briefly about privacy laws that are emerging and have emerged in our region, right? Here based in Singapore, but also across many other countries in ASEAN like Thailand, China, Asia Pacific as a whole, New Zealand, and so on. Right? Equally important, each industry will have its own regulatory compliance issues, right? Insurance has IFRS, banking has Basel or BCBS, we have some in healthcare, and various requirements even that put requirements on how we collect, govern our information, and ultimately build reliable, trustworthy reports to the regulator and able to withstand audits, whether it be internal or external. The third major driver that we see, of course, is this idea of digital transformation. Right? We've been talking about this for a while now, and of course, many leaders, not just from a data perspective, but even across the company, the CEO, the COO, are very keen on understanding how we're going to harness the raw data we have to drive digital transformation. And that ultimately comes from coming with new innovations, better insights on our customers, better insights on the different aspects of our business in order to come up with new ways of transacting and engaging. Right? So last but not least, the fourth one is how we support the IT leaders and the architecture teams who are in charge of driving the transformation from an infrastructure perspective. So as you can see here, there are very many different strategic reasons that we should embark on a data governance journey. And it's no longer confined to a purely compliance exercise that may have been imagined in the past. And indeed, this is coming true from a lot of the global surveys that we have seen. For giving you an example here, IDC ran this survey for over 1,000 CDOs across the globe in 2020. Right? And one key fact, of course, there are many different statistics that were found, but if we look at the CDOs today, the vast majority of their success factors, their KPIs, are ultimately driven by business outcomes, whether it be efficiency, better privacy, innovation and revenue, and similar sorts of factors. So it's very important to keep that in mind as we think about any given journey, or even for ourselves who are in the audience today, why are we embarking or considering data governance? Now, knowing the reason for data governance is the most important, right? The second key step, of course, is having a clear idea of the challenges that currently make it difficult. You see a list of phrases on top there, right? Dispersed and siloed data landscape, evolving changes, right? Internal, external stakeholders, complexity, non-transparency, etc., etc. Right? So all of these things, I'm sure we would have heard within our organizations. And it's important to understand as part of the identification journey. Our data leaders, right, who have been successful to date, are able to clearly articulate the biggest barriers, both to their management as well as to their peer departments. Ultimately, these are the different stakeholders within the company which we would consider internal customers to our data. So coming back to New York Life, for example, they would also go through the same exercise to understand what were the actual drivers as well as business case to launch a maturity program for data governance. So as we can see here, there's a lot of different boxes on the screen, but I'll just call out a few items that stand out to me. Right? What they did was look at the issues around data quality, its impact on the customer experience, the constraints internally with the analytics team due to different quality and discovery issues that stop them from building better, intelligent insights on the data they have. Right? As well as, if you see on the upper right, difficulty complying with emerging laws. But over and above just identifying what the pain points are and the problems which would make sense to the different stakeholders in the organization, they went further and dug into the root causes beneath or below the actual pain points that were expressed, as you can see on the screen there, right? And ultimately, the reason for going through all this analysis, even if it may seem to be a little bit of effort upfront, is to help us in two ways. Number one, it helps to develop the solution roadmap, which we will look at after this in the next section, right? Perhaps more importantly, this sort of exercise helps to build the stakeholder buy-in. And this is a point that we'll emphasize again and again, where no data governance journey has been successful being purely led from either an IT-centric perspective or from a central siloed team where they have not had some amount of understanding and buy-in from their relevant stakeholder departments. So now that we have set the scene for how this sort of journey can be created as well as evolved, let us have a brief look at Informatica's enterprise data governance platform. Before I get into the details of that, we want to briefly understand that there are two major challenges that a solution such as this needs to face in today's environment. The first challenge that data leaders would face is the increasing complexity and variety of data environments as well as data types. Now, this diagram is intentionally busy, right? It's not intended to be prescriptive, but rather to understand, for example, that towards the bottom of the diagram, most organizations have systems, applications, and data stores on-premise, or so-called within their data centers. Over time, we've evolved this towards having some amount of information in the cloud. And we also start to see the evolution beyond the IaaS and PaaS to start to put information into cloud-based applications as well under the SaaS model. And all of these are coexisting at the same time. So as Informatica has been in the data space as well as supporting enterprises through this evolution for over 20 years, we see all sorts of permutations, and try to summarize briefly there on the two-axis diagrams you can see. Right? It is not uncommon to find more than one permutation of these sorts of data deployments in any given sizable organization. Indeed, Gartner estimates that over 94% of enterprise customers are in some sort of multi-cloud or hybrid environment strategy as we speak. So certainly, this sort of environment presents challenges for our data governance platform. Across all these complexity and variety, the goal of a data governance platform is to answer certain key questions, as you can see on the screen there, regardless of the variety, regardless of the level of structured or unstructured data which may exist in the real world. Moving on quickly, the second challenge for a successful data governance platform is to ensure that we're going to bring value to all the different stakeholders in the company. Right? I hope that the use case already gave us a little bit of a sense how organizations have been able to find success through this. But if we look at what a solution needs to achieve, right, we need to acknowledge that even though many different parts of organization today are talking about data governance, it is also often true that they are talking with slightly different meanings, or they have different expectations as to what data governance would bring. So therefore, the goal of our data governance solution is to answer the right questions for the right personas, and especially to make sure that we use a language that they will understand when they are looking at the data landscape that they have. To make it more specific, an example would be on the left-hand side, right? Our business leaders, our department data owners, as well as people who are working more closely to the business, would ultimately want to see the impact of well-managed data on their business outcomes. They're not interested in data for its own sake. They're interested in improving their marketing outreach efforts. They're interested in finding opportunities for greater operational efficiency. They're looking on how to improve the self-service BI reporting that they may currently use within their own departments. In this case, data governance for these business-centric users are seen as an enabler, and the faster and more convenient we can make it, that would be the success factor. It's also important to ensure that the platform doesn't burden them with a lot of technical jargon, a lot of acronyms and system names, which come from the IT world and would take a lot of time for the business users to understand and clarify. Right? But of course, if you look at a central CDO or data governance team, they are looking for consistency, control, and accountability towards their policies and organizational standards. Right? So a slightly different lens and so on. As you can see, we move along the spectrum. Such a platform needs to be able to answer very many questions that may come up over time. So a brief introduction to address these various challenges, or two of these major challenges I've just talked about. The Unified Data Governance Platform from Informatica actually has four major components. But the first one here is really the central hub, our data governance workbench that we call Exxon. Right? It is designed to be user-friendly, business-friendly, and present just the right amount of information, but actually powered by a powerful sort of search and query algorithm under the hood that will allow you to answer questions which are more relevant to the business and has the right context, right? And not just technical questions. And we will see some examples of how that works in action. In addition, because this is the business-facing portal, we offer a data marketplace, which will be one of the much sought-after outcomes once we have brought a certain amount of information under the right control with high levels of quality and understandability. But to round out the platform, under the hood, we see enterprise data catalog. This concept is not new to a lot of us who may have already been looking at the data space and the technology world, right? So this is, in my terminology, the engine room of our whole data governance effort. Enterprise data catalog needs to be able to go out into the complex distributed IT landscape that I showed at the start and be able to quickly connect and, more than that, understand what is actually residing in all the different data stores. Pushing forward into data quality priorities as well as issues that are affected by quality, innovation issues, compliance issues, reporting issues. We have a strong data quality capability and engine, which not only allows you to do quality exercises at scale, but to link technical quality exercises to the actual outcomes and objectives as defined by the business. And last but not least, of course, as we mentioned, data privacy is an ongoing and I would say increasingly urgent topic. And for those of us who have worked with data privacy officers, compliance teams, even information security teams, we know they need very specific data points as well as dashboards in order to be able to do their duties in an efficient and sort of well-controlled manner. So suffice to say, that this platform is there to support all the different personas in the day-to-day tasks that they have, but be able to link together as a unified platform ultimately to answer the different questions and not lead to more confusion when there's different sets of information lying about. So having brought you through that, it may seem that this is a quite a large platform that can support so many different use cases. Right? But ultimately, when we look at the very first phase of many of the different customers that have used this platform, getting started, right? Even though the platform is very broad to cater to different use cases, it is a straightforward process using these three major steps in order to get started. So we define it as, we call it, the first step would be define and discover, right? Which is the information that you have or the metadata you have. We'll follow it up by making sure that we're connecting the right elements together and the right systems together, and ultimately bringing it all under a easy to use and well understood control dashboard. Right? And this is underpinned by various AI techniques, which I will explain briefly as well. But more importantly, our goal here is to encourage collaboration between the various stakeholders that ultimately need to work together to make these different use cases and data strategies successful. So I'll briefly dive into each of these major steps here. Right? Our first step of governance in the platform is to set up a proper framework. Right? This allows any data assets, any real data assets to be seen in the right context of the people, the processes, and the policies that relate to them. Out of the box, if you look at an Informatica data governance platform, we provide over 20 different dimensions, right, or contexts for data. Now, that's not to say that we need to use them all, but ultimately it's a very rich meta model, which allows us to pick what is relevant and important for our first priorities and quickly populate that information in order to begin our data governance journey. Right? So I won't read through all the different dimensions that you can see up there, but at a high level, they're divided into representations of our data and our technology, representations of our business itself and the change initiatives that are going on, representations of our organization, the structure, the people, the roles, right? As well as representations of regulatory and policy aspects, which are important to bring into compliance and assure that governance is doing its intended outcomes. And all these different elements that I talk about can be easily put into the platform from a top-down perspective, because we're able to bring in whatever you may already have in your organization with something as simple as Excel uploads or CSV files, right? And not just bring them in, but link them together through glossaries, through hierarchies and relationships and other forms of linkage, which allow you to make sense and organize the world in a way that resembles what your business is familiar with, right? And for those who are coming from large organizations operating in different business units or different geographies, the platform is also able to support that sort of segmentation and information control, which reflects the way data governance is done in the organization. Moving quickly to step 1B, if I may say so, right? Discovery, before we had a top-down sort of setup of a governance framework. The power of the automation here is that the bottom-up step of discovery can be made highly efficient and automated through the use of a platform such as Informatica. Right? The first step in this is to establish connectivity to all the different types of data stores and information you may have. So I'll just move on briefly here, right? So the thing that we are very proud of in Informatica is due to the rich heritage as well as its position within the market. It has the widest range of scanners and connectivity to all the types of technology that you may have out there. Right? So out of the box, we offer over 200 different types of technology connectors, which then translates into cost saving as far as integration and services work, which will typically characterize these sorts of data discovery projects. Right? And over and beyond what you see on the screen here, right? Not all scanners are created equal. Right? When we get down to actually doing such work, we often find that customers want to understand not just data at rest, but data movement as well. So we have the idea of advanced scanners and custom scanning, which looks deep into data transformations, looks deep into your scripting engines and things like that, which would also bring additional transparency and light onto what's actually happening as your data moves across your IT landscape. But once we have actually extracted and understood what's actually there in terms of the metadata across our different systems, what's actually important from translating raw metadata or raw data into knowledge is really understanding, right? And so this is where the AI algorithms come into play, or one example of where AI algorithms come into play. Automated discovery means that we do not just look at the obvious examples of how we understand what is actually residing in your data stores and databases. In the interest of time, I will expand this slide quickly. But what you can see here is that we apply many different techniques in order to understand what's actually residing in the data. So those of us who come from IT background know that when you open up a schema or data store, information is not always well labeled, not always well defined in terms of columns, tables, and the like. Right? Where they do exist, of course, we show great efficiency in order to quickly find them and make sense of the information and categorize them. And we do that at scale, right? So you can have thousands, tens of thousands of tables being done in a very short period of time. But we go beyond to understand whether or not there is patterns as well as implications within the data itself. So even though the data governance platform is not going to store your information, it is going to sample and understand and ultimately make sense of what might be in your data stores. And these algorithms go through a lot of different refinement given the volume of data governance projects that we have. And additionally, work together with your data stewards to come up with the best results and ensure that the ultimate tagging is done properly, which I'll explain later. Okay. Understanding what's in each data field, column, or similar element is only the first step, right? Our data governance platform goes further to basically build up the idea of entities. Now, if we think of a data dictionary or business glossary, which is really the logical representation of the information and business model, if you like, or data business model, right? We have higher level concepts, right? An address is a combination of different fields. And when we add it together with other pieces of information, we represent an entity called customer, right? And there might be other pieces of information that give us a clue as to what the overall context of this data set refers to. So not only does Informatica look at what the individual elements contain in order to deduce its characteristics, but also it has this idea of building up a composite domain, right? And then quickly allow our data governance team and ultimately our data users to understand what is the intention and the nature of these different data sets that we have discovered, right? And what would it be appropriate to use such information for? Now, all of this can seem like a lot of complexity under the hood. So out of the box, we do deliver a lot of different pre-built rules, algorithms, and tags for the most common data domains. Of course, customer will be there, order-related management, and other such things. Some of them are specific to industry as well. These are the past two slides have really shown you how the system behaves under the hood. And at the end of the day, this intelligence happens behind the scenes. It doesn't just happen in the cloud. It can also happen for your on-prem data warehouses, for your application databases as well. Right? What we are aiming for here at the end of the day is a streamlined curation experience for your data stewards, for your subject matter experts. Right? And history has shown that they can expect typically 80% and 90% efficiency in terms of the gains in curating such information versus a manual data discovery effort. Right? And this is important because the volume of information has grown beyond the ability to manage manually. And finally, this slide here also highlights the fact that we apply yet more AI algorithms once your data steward has started to curate information. Right? When there has been confirmation by the data users on the predicted types of information or the tagging that has been done, the system then applies other clustering or similarity algorithms to go forward and find many other data sets that resemble the same one, regardless of the underlying technology stack. Right? So all these techniques are here to accelerate your data governance setup, your data governance understanding, and ultimately allow your data stewards to focus on the more important methods of actually doing governance. Now, if you recall the three-step foundation, right, there is an idea of connectivity. Right? Once we have discovered and made sense of a lot of information, we need to be able to connect it together. And without diving into the details of this slide, connectivity to me refers to two different levels. First of all, we explained that Informatica data governance is made out of a few core components, right? And in order to give you a better context of that, this is best of breed and modular. So depending on your business priorities in your current project, you may choose to deploy one or more of these initially within your IT landscape or your governance platform, right? But rest assured that because they are all well integrated, this idea of connectivity between the modules will support the different use cases that come online over time, depending on what you choose to deploy. But the second idea of connectivity really is in the circle that you see on the right-hand side. Within the metadata model itself, the 20 different dimensions, over 20 different dimensions which I referred, right? This entire platform is actually built on a graph database. Right? The idea here is to be able to connect the different points and perspectives of data that then allow us to ask intelligent questions. So that's something that happens organically to a certain extent, and also over time, when you work with different departments and make more sense and answer more questions, that the richness of the connectivity will increase within your data governance platform. So to be able to show you how that works in action for control and monitor, we've just sketched out this diagram, right? Which is basically hammering home the point that the governance metadata here that we've collected and discovered over time will help us to answer different questions for different stakeholders. For example, right, for your data owner or your CDO, right, your governance team, you might be looking at a specific policy initiative, and you want to have the awareness of what processes, business processes, will shape and implicate the data, as well as the different stakeholders that will need to be involved along the way in an end-to-end business process. Alternatively, someone coming from the data privacy office or data protection office would require the transparency and efficient discovery of where personal data, sensitive data is actually being spread throughout the organization. In a similar manner, if we support our IT management and our solution architects, they would bring in other elements to understand the impacts or the implication of doing major changes to their IT planning. Right? If I want to do a big change to my IT system or even decommission the system, who are the downstream consumers and those that are impacted in terms of the data that is generated through the current system. So all of this are presented through user-friendly dashboards, searches, and the like, which allows them to achieve many different outcomes, but more importantly, quickly cater to the needs from quite a wide range of data users, as we can see. Right? So these past few minutes have taken us through the data governance platform setup, which hopefully gives you a sense for what's actually happening under the surface when we talk about an end-to-end integrated governance platform. So for the next 5 minutes, I will quickly bring us through a few of the data outcomes that we can expect once this has been put in place. We have already looked at the idea of quality, and indeed that was one of the primary challenges that New York Life that we saw at the start was faced with and escalated as a key pain point. Now, certainly, I believe that most organizations today have some form of data quality work that's been done. It may be driven out of specific projects or out of IT. They often use manual approaches or handcrafted code. Right? So when we say data governance quality, it is actually bringing it up to a more scalable and consistent manner. Right? It needs to be able to answer certain key questions like, what is the meaning of our data quality rule when it comes from a business stakeholder's voice? Who's accountable for keeping this quality high, right? It's not just an IT problem, which is oftentimes the starting assumption within an organization, right? What is the business perspective of the data quality landscape? And can we report on this in a way that is ultimately meaningful and not just overloaded with a lot of technical data points around our quality metrics? The second key outcome here is to understand the origin and the lineage of our data, right? And this is really about helping many different use cases, and I'll give a few examples. When we look at compliance, for example, within banking, Basil, not only are we required to report comprehensively a lot of key metrics to the regulator, financial regulator, but we have to assure that the entire supply chain of information from its original capture through, say, our data warehouses, etc., have been well governed, and we have to provide such transparency to the regulator. So no doubt, this sort of information would help compliance efforts, right? If we think from analytics perspective, or even AI modeling, right, increasing scrutiny is being put on the sources of the information that we get, or even the sources of the AI model themselves. The reliability and trust in our analytics outcomes would ultimately come back to how well we can understand and explain the origin and the lineage of our data. And this screen here shows you that we acknowledge that traditionally data lineage can be a very complex and a view that has many data points, right? Suitable for very technically minded. So what it does is then automatically elevate and create a simplified diagram positioned in a business language that would suit different customers who want to understand that purely from the perspective of their current exercise. So wrapping up, two more benefits, right? One key one is that we see a lot of concern these days regarding data privacy and protection, right? Particularly in the past 2 years, as I've mentioned. One of the key drivers, of course, which probably is no surprise, is work from home, and emphasis on online transactions these days have gone up dramatically since 2020 and the global pandemic. So now we see that customers, as in your ultimate customers, as well as the companies that we serve, are typically on high alert as to the risks around data collection and use, right? So then the question becomes, how do we turn this foundation of data governance into an actionable data privacy program, right? Which is risk-based, which activates the appropriate protections at the appropriate time, and more importantly, alerts when there are suspicious activities and movements occurring around our data, right? So Informatica remains data-centric, but is able to provide the right sort of features for the stakeholders that you see on the right here. Now, last but not least, one of the very attractive outcomes that data leaders have asked for and that we do support is what we call the data-driven organization. This may take different terms or names, right? Sometimes they say, I would like to increase the data culture within my company. But ultimately, what we're looking at is the way to bring data and the use of data into the daily lives, not just of our IT teams and data management, the data-centric, or even our so-called expert analytics teams. We want this to be part of the culture of the business over time. So you can see here on the screen quite a few different areas that we do support. But ultimately, these are the sorts of outcomes where having a good set of governance, both from a data set as well as a business glossary perspective, right? We're able to quickly help consumers look for the information that they want, right? Do an easy experience in terms of curating, understanding, and then ultimately requesting that information, not unlike an online shopping experience, right? We also understand that there are times when users just want to interpret a report and understand what's happening in their Tableau, in their Power BI, and we have ability to bring in just the right amount of metadata to provide the context and the stakeholders behind the report that they're currently looking, and then it can get out of the way. So they do not have to leave their Tableau or Power BI in order to get the benefits of the data governance foundation that we talked about. And similarly, down here, across other sorts of applications, whatever they're reading, even a PDF document, we can have a hotkey-driven lookup to quickly understand what particular terms and glossaries mean to the business as a whole. And that allows us to have a deeper understanding of whatever documents they may be dealing with at a point in time. So all of this is reducing the friction and increasing the adoption of our metadata, as well as our data governance outcomes throughout the organization, which is what a lot of data leaders are looking for today. So to summarize, really, we started this whole section after the use case talking about some of the major challenges that a data governance platform needs to solve, right? Coming from the top down, one of it was being able to understand all the different data stakeholders' needs, right? And within the platform itself, we see sort of three key capabilities that are required. Business value alignment really means that are we able to show how the activity we're doing, the data points we've collected, and the conversations we're having are aligned to certain priorities within business, right? So this should be done explicitly within a platform, provided accountability, as well as potentially even show the value of increasing adoption of your data over time. There's no doubt that stakeholder collaboration is probably the centerpiece of this, right? So from a technology perspective, there will be a fully flexible workflow engine that you can drag and drop to configure, right? Compliant with business process, BPMN standards and the like, right? And provide notifications, emails, and all that to ensure that this whole process is streamlined. The reporting and different dashboards are there, which we can show in subsequent sessions, but they're all designed with different users and use cases in mind and are provided out of the box. From a bottom up, right, coming back to the first challenge we saw around the complex IT landscape, all that connectivity, right, the broadest connectivity in the market, right, showing you the different kinds of technologies and algorithms we apply in order to automate the understanding and categorization and tagging of the data, right, means, sort of exponential efficiency in terms of getting up and running and then delivering the outcomes we were talking about. And ultimately, these 6 capabilities at the bottom, form the data governance foundation, which then lead to the different outcomes, which we very quickly talked about, and in fact are evolving over time as these organizations go up the data governance or data leadership maturity curve. So I will wrap up there, just dropping a note that Informatica, of course, having been in this space for quite many years, is currently recognized as the market leader and has been so for quite a few years now, not just by one analyst, but multiple different industry observers, right? But more importantly, as promised, we talked about New York Life. They are just an example of many different other stories that we have, direct interviews, as well as videos that you can go and watch to understand how other organizations such as yourself have successfully gone through this data journey.